Harumasa is ZenlessZoneZero's first free S rank, and let me be the first to say it. He looks very cool, but he can be complicated. The swapping between range to melee is a completely new concept to this game, but it feels so rewarding to say the least. Additionally, as we'll see in today's guide, Harumasa's kit and gameplay can be tricky at times, so I'll be going over exactly what you need to know and what to avoid. So in short, Harumasa is a free S-rank agent that we're all getting in 1.4, but before I continue, I'd like to remind you all that the footage from today's video will be from the creator beta server, so things are subject to change. With that, let's break down everything you need to know about Harumasa. Harumasa's ideal playstyle is a repeating loop. Plant electric quivers, aka orbs on the ground, consume them to mark the enemy, dash attack 4 times, use your energy to plant more orbs on the ground, mark again, rinse, and repeat. This can be optimized in a number of ways, similar to that of Jane or Miyabi, but there is some bad news. Based on extensive testing, Harumasa's damage being compared to that of Ellen or Juyuen is highly dependent on whether you can use his ideal combos. This means you'll actually have to practice his combo if you want to hit those Ellen Juyuen DPS numbers. As for what the combo actually is though, we'll get to that later. Let's now take a look at his kit further and begin with his unique resource known as Electro Quivers, aka these tiny little blue orbs. There can be 6 of these orbs out at a time, and they will change the way that Harumasa plays. Before we go any further though, certain skills will spawn these orbs when Harumasa casts them, and this is just a quick summary of which does what. If there are no orbs on the field when any squad member applies an attribute anomaly, 6 will spawn on the field. Additionally, if using an EX special, a chain attack, or if you perform his 5th basic attack after a chain attack for the first time, 6 will also be placed on field too. Finally, if using the 5th hit of Harumasa's basic attack normally, he will generate 2 orbs as opposed to the 6 like with the other scenarios or cases that I just mentioned. Now we need to talk about Falling Feather, which is the equally as important second part of Harumasa's gameplay. This is a charged attack that puts Harumasa into a scoped stance, and it also has some cool interactions that change the way that Harumasa's attack works. If there are any orbs present when Harumasa fires and hits enemies with Falling Feather, said orbs will activate and fire at the enemies hit by Falling Feather, dealing electric damage. On a separate note, this attack will apply Electro Prison to enemies hit, stacking up to 8 times and landing 10 seconds, and if said target has at least 2 stacks of Electro Prison, they will be X marked too. This is important to know because while enemies are marked with an X, Harumasa enters the awakened state and exchanges his normal dash attack for an empowered one that consumes 2 Electro Prison stacks per hit. But unfortunately for Harumasa, being able to identify how many stacks are left on a target is actually pretty difficult, as there are no clear indications. Side note, these stacks are only applied assuming the enemy is stunned or has an attribute anomaly on them. But to summarize this section, certain attacks will generate blue orbs, and blue orbs can be consumed by charging a basic attack and shooting at an enemy. Doing this results in leaving an X mark on your target and generating stacks. Whenever you have an X mark on a target, Harumasa is then able to perform his highest damage dealing ability, Hiten no Suru Slash, aka his enhanced dash attack, but this does cost stacks to cast. Therefore, stacks and the X mark are really important to keep track of. Now with the outline of his kit complete, let's move to Harumasa's core passive and additional ability. Harumasa's passive affects his enhanced dash attack in 2 ways. First, it increases the crit rate of his enhanced dash attack by 25%, and when Harumasa's set attack crits against an enemy, he gains 1 stack of Gleaming Edge. This can be stacked up to 3 times per use of the skill, but overall stacks up to 6 times. These stacks last 5 seconds with repeated triggers resetting duration, but that's not all. These stacks increase the crit damage of the enhanced dash attack by 12%, so in other words, his core passive significantly buffs his enhanced dash attack with an up to 72% crit damage buff and rewards you of course for using it. In regard to his additional ability, when another agent in your squad is a stun or anomaly character, Harumasa's attacks against stunned enemies or enemies under attribute anomaly increase by 40%. When Harumasa's Falling Feather hits stunned enemies or enemies under attribute anomaly, it will then apply 2 stacks of Electro Prison to the target. In short, hitting anomaly affected enemies or stunned mobs in general is the way to go for Harumasa so that he can maximize his damage and also gain more stacks. Now let's actually dive into his kit, starting with his basics. There are 4 parts / versions, but outside of his basic attack Falling Feather, which is his charged basic attack, and basic attack Ha Oto no Ya, the marking process and trap skill, you won't be using many of his basic attacks anyways. His EX special deals decent damage, but the main use of this skill is generating blue orbs so that you can generate stacks for his X mark faster. Now regarding his dodge related abilities, this is where a majority of his damage comes from. His dodge, normal dash attack and dodge counter are nothing special and treated like any other agent, but the enhanced dash attack that he gains when X-marked enemies are on the field makes this ability his #1 priority. As mentioned previously, this is his biggest source of damage, but while this ability does increase anti-interrupt levels, remember that the damage reduction he gains on the skill does not make him invulnerable. Harumasa's assists are also standard for attack agents, but keep in mind that with the 1.4 ultimate decibel changes, assists have gained even more value as they increase the overall ultimate charge of all allies too. His chain attack spawns 6 orbs on the ground when cast, deals a decent amount of damage, and also allows Harumasa's next 5th basic attack to generate orbs too. Side note, I'm not a huge fan of the range that this ability has, as it feels somewhat clunky at times, but if you're grouping enemies together or if you're just hitting a single target, this won't be a problem at all. Finally, Harumasa's ultimate is pretty nice damage-wise, but as with all DPS, this is just added damage to the boss or enemies that Harumasa will use. With what we just saw in the kit section, this is now a good time to talk about skill upgrades. In terms of ability order, Harumasa's core skill followed by dodge, then ultimate, special, ending with assist and basic attack is the preferred order. Harumasa honestly focuses a ton on his dash attacks, so upgrading this is the most important. But following this, the ultimate and next most used ability, which is his EX special, will come next. Rounding out the end of his kit, assists are nice for added damage or daze, but basics really don't do much for Harumasa. Now we really should address Harumasa's combos, or well, actually combo singular, because there's really only one way to make this character deal competitive damage. To start, you'll need 6 orbs on the ground already, so this means you'll have to either use an EX special to start with, use a chain attack, or apply anomaly to an enemy beforehand. Then you'll also want the enemy to be close to being stunned, but not quite there. Harumasa will swap onto field, use his charged attack, follow this with his enhanced dash attack, stun with said dash attack, and enter into the chain attack cycle. Following this, perform a chain attack with an ally, swap back to Harumasa, and then end the chain attack from here. This will then begin the repetitive but actual damage dealing process. Once ending the chain attack, perform his 3 remaining enhanced dash attacks until he is out of X mark dash attacks. Perform a charged attack again to recharge the marks on the enemy using the orbs that we just put on the field using our original chain attack. Then enhance dash attack until he runs out of marks again. Then use his enhanced dash attacks once again until he runs out of them. Once this happens, we use an EX special attack, cast another charge attack to mark the enemy, then use enhanced dash attacks until he runs out of charges for the last time. End this off with an ultimate from Harumasa to deal as much damage as physically possible within the stun window that we're given from the boss. If this was a lot, you'd be right. This is actually pretty difficult to time, and I can definitely see how landing all of these moves under one measly stun window might seem difficult, but unfortunately, this is the best combo that Harumasa has. Now, of course, I wouldn't leave you guys without an easier or more simple combo to follow, but I do need to warn you, this is roughly a 20% dip in damage, assuming you use this instead. However, the upside is that it is way easier to do. The main difference here is that we'll first start with a chain attack sequence with the team's stunner and end with a chain attack on Harumasa to begin things off. Then we'll perform a charge attack to apply the X mark to the enemy, use 4 enhanced dash attacks until Harumasa runs out of them, perform a charge attack, follow this with an EX special, dash attack again until he runs out, and end this entire sequence with an ultimate as the finale. Again, for clarity, this is way less damage than the original best combo, but based on the timeliness and tuning of things, you might not always be able to do his perfect other ideal rotation, so therefore do with this information what you will. Let's move on to Harumasa's W engine choices. There are a few here that will perform decently for him, but like Miyabi and most other banner characters, his signature will perform best for him. In most cases, the difference between his signature's performance and A rank or even non-limited S rank W engines, but with his overall damage and his role in ZenlessZoneZero, I actually wouldn't recommend pulling for his signature. The reason for this is actually the new event W engine that we'll be receiving soon, which is known as Marcato Desire. This increases the attack of its equipper by 9.6% at rank 5 for 8 seconds, and while the target is afflicted with an attribute anomaly, this gets raised to 19.2 total. Overall, this is a solid choice for Harumasa given that he synergizes well with anomalies on the team, but Starlight Engine and even Anton's signature is roughly similar in performance too if you still have that lying around. It is still worth mentioning that his signature outperforms nearly every other option by a decent amount in realistic cases, but Brimstone has also shown to do well too, assuming that you managed to pull that or lost a 75-25. My personal recommendation for this choice on Harumasa, however, is just to use the event W engine, since I think a lot of players are likely going to use Harumasa as a filler character or just use him when you have to fight against a lightning fighting enemy, and therefore reaching for or needing to pull a signature in addition to what he has already may seem a little excessive. Let's talk about the rest of Harumasa's build with his W engine now out of the way. His best set is Thunder Metal and Woodpecker, but this is assuming you can maintain each passive effect on both sets. This really shouldn't be a problem though. For main stats, you're looking for the following. On 4th slot, attack percent or crit damage depending on your rolls, W engine and team composition. For 5th slot, electric damage, attack percent or pen ratio if you're pairing Harumasa with Rina. But finally for the 6th slot, attack percent will be your one and only choice. Which main stat you choose here will mostly depend on which stat you feel like you've stacked a lot of, but as always, if you have better rolls on one disk drive over another, feel free to use that instead. On a somewhat related note, keep in mind that the performance of most sets and W engines is tied to what combination of main stats or sets that you use on the character, and in that case, if you use something like Starlight Engine with a 4th slot attack percent disc, this might not actually perform that well. My recommendation then for the build is the following: 4-piece Thunder Metal, 2-piece Woodpecker, Marcato Desire, the event W engine, 4th slot crit damage, 5th slot electric damage, and 6th slot attack percent. This setup is pretty powerful even with it being more free-to-play leaning, but in case you really love him, replacing Marcato with his signature and his 4th slot with attack percent will increase his damage by a respectable amount too. The final stats that I will include here will revolve around a potential stat line: 2,800 to 3,000 attack, 50% to 75% crit rate, and 130 to 150 crit damage is going to be the stat line that you want to look for. All of this doesn't include the core passive stats, to be clear, since with the amount of stats that you gain, your actual goal is to hit 75% crit rate, but then increases to 100% using his core passive that he has an insane amount of free stats from. On the topic of Mindscapes, Harumasa's are honestly pretty average. One of the biggest misconceptions about his first Mindscape is the appeal of having additional stacks for his X mark. This is almost impossible to make use of since the stun duration of bosses is not nearly enough to fit all 14 stacks properly. Lighter can help mitigate this issue, but overall the addition of Lighter to compensate for this is not nearly as valuable, especially since you would be removing someone like Chingy from his spot instead. His second Mindscape allows his ultimate and chain attacks to increase the damage of his dash attack by 50%, but it does come with a new stack mechanic that gets consumed anytime he uses his dash attacks again. Overall, a decent spike in damage and would change the way that you use Harumasa's ultimate, but in general, it's not actually nearly as amazing as it sounds. His 4th Mindscape doesn't do much to improve his overall damage, but instead this is helpful for generating more ultimates for those of you who aren't tracking how long the X mark stacks have been up for. And finally, the 6th Mindscape is a significant increase to his overall damage, but as always, this is a 6th level Mindscape, so the bonkers increase in damage is to be expected. And now finally, let's talk about Harumasa's teams. I personally found one character to have the best synergy with Harumasa, and that's Chingy. The stun damage increase, the ability to compensate for Harumasa, and not wanting to be on field 24/7 make them a perfect match. However, the reason that I also want to include Ambi here now is because Harumasa's role as the first free S-rank agent really made me curious about how powerful a full free-to-play team composition would be. And let me tell you, it is pretty strong. From my testing, I found that Nicole and Caesar felt roughly similar in clear time and performance, but what really helped here was having the additional damage increase and grouping / anti-interrupt to make a much more comfortable experience. Personally, I found the grouping and clumping of enemies together to be quite annoying with Harumasa in most cases, and since his chain attack is pretty low range, Nicole felt perfect to band-aid all these problems. Caesar was a bit underwhelming to my surprise, but I found this to mostly be the case because enemies were usually stunned and then died once Harumasa was allowed to use his abilities, and also because I didn't actually really get to use much of Caesar's barrier nearly as much, given that I was pretty much dodge countering or parrying constantly with Chingy against most of the enemies I fought. All this being said, I would still consider this to be the best Harumasa composition though, of all the ones that I tested. And then I tried the full free-to-play team, Harumasa, Ambi, Nicole, and to my surprise, this actually felt pretty strong. This team did remind me of when I played Juyuan pre-Chingy release, but of course the damage was still somewhat lacking in comparison. This isn't to say that it wasn't capable of clearing, but it did feel way more fast-paced across different agents on my team. And beyond anything else guys, this was honestly pretty fun, even without having any limited S-rank agents on my team. In the Shiyu defense stages that I tested as well, I really didn't have any trouble getting S-rank clears, but that really shouldn't be surprising since Ambi stuns so quickly and can be kept on field until Harumasa is ready to unload his damage, and Nicole, well, is a terrific crowd control support to make the multi-wave encounters easy. Of course, there are several other teams that worked well with Harumasa, but these were mostly variations of what I listed above. Interestingly, Lighter didn't feel nearly as good for Harumasa since his his basic attack Daze application felt lacking and being on field with him kind of felt wasted, but I will admit that having a longer stun duration to land all my abilities under a specific window did actually feel pretty good. To round things out, here are the rest of the teams that I believe you could potentially run and have success with, specifically with Harumasa. But that's going to be it for today's video though, guys. Thanks again for watching. Feel free to like, comment, turn on the notification bell, and subscribe. As always, I hope you guys learned or enjoyed today's video. I will see you guys on the next one. Check out the rest of my socials if you haven't already. Thanks again for watching. Good night, good afternoon. Bye.